So it's been just over 6 weeks now since I travelled to Istanbul in Turkey to have a hair transplant at the Vera Clinic. So I want to do this video as something where I share my experience of the process of getting a hair transplant in Turkey, but also my thoughts on the Vera Clinic and my experience for the last few weeks since I've had my hair transplant. But first of all, I want to start off by speaking about my hair loss journey. I've always had hair on the thinner side. However, I've never really noticed any hair loss until about 2019, where I noticed that at my crown, I was losing noticeable amounts of hair. But at that point, throughout that year, I didn't really notice any more kind of hair loss. It all stayed localized towards my crown and I was okay with that. Then you go on to the COVID years of 2020 to 2021. I started to notice far more thinning on the mid-scalp, more reduction on the crown and also at the front of my head. Roll forward to 2023. I thought December was the best time to get a hair transplant, as at this point of the year, usually things slow down with work, but also it's colder. So in terms of avoiding sweating and training for outdoor events, it's probably a lot more reduced and it's a good time to do it. So once I had decided to get a hair transplant, it came down to the decision of choosing where I would go for a hair transplant. Now, obvious solution is going to Turkey, as that's always popular and renowned for many of its clinics. It came down to two clinics for me, and it was between either Vera or Smile hair clinics. I decided to go Vera just because of the two main people I followed on YouTube, being Amit and Amir, and their process of going through their hair transplant. I'm sure you can see on their channels if you want to. And also just looking at a further research I've done, they seem to be a slick operation, fair value in terms of cost, and also I was comfortable with going there myself. When it comes to the packages they offered, there was three different types of packages offered to me at the time of me going for a hair transplant. The basic package, which is the Diamond Sapphire, that includes your 3-night stay in a hotel, plus you pick up and return from the clinic and the hotel and pick up from the airport. But that's just your basic run-of-the-mill. They're going to do your hair transplant. The second package, which is the fast recovery package, now this includes everything of the Diamond Sapphire, but also 2 Oxycure sessions where you are going into a hyperbaric chamber with reduced oxygen levels to kind of promote blood flow and hair growth. Now, I don't know how useful these are, and I'll state later in the video what I found personally about this. Third package, which is their premium one, which is the stem cell package. That includes everything from the Diamond Sapphire and the fast recovery, but also stem cell treatment, as well as 3-month supply of shampoos, which you don't get with the other two. I did actually go for the fast recovery package just because at the time of me purchasing, I thought, oh, it might be useful going for having the 2 Oxycure sessions. But I'll speak about it later in the video where my real thoughts lie on this. So when it comes to the hair transplant, I actually end up traveling from London Stansted to Istanbul SAW. Now, I chose a flight with Pegasus Airlines that traveled from 11 PM at night and landed at 6 AM in the morning. I thought this would be a good idea because it gave me a whole day before my hair transplant that I had a chance to explore Istanbul and relax before my operation. The airport, as Dan said, was pretty empty when we started to jet off. I took my friend with me as a bit of moral support. He was going to be there for a few days with me while I had my hair transplant. When we landed at 6 AM in the morning at Istanbul SAW, I had already received a text message prior to this from Vera about where I need to go for a airport pickup. They picked us up in a Mercedes Vito van, I think it was. Very new, nice, comfortable journey. I think it was only about 15-20 minutes from the airport to the hotel, which was at Elite World Asia. Now, it was 6 in the morning, so we didn't really have any traffic on the roads, just bear that in mind. But the big issue when you land so early in the morning and you go to the hotel is you cannot check in, as check-in isn't until about 2 PM usually. So here we had a bit of time to kill. They did try and help us out at the hotel, and they said we could probably check in about 11 AM. So we decided to pay for breakfast at a hotel and have a little nap. Once we managed to check in to our hotel room, we decided to take a taxi or to the other side of Istanbul, which is we're located on the Asia side. Now we want to go to the European side just because that's where all the kind of tourist sites are. We decided to go have a walk around Sultan Ahmed, which is the more historic part of the city. Then also go to Salt Bay's restaurant, which was pretty nice for a steak, and some dessert. I would say by the time we decided to go back to the hotel, it was about 6-7 PM, and traffic from one side of the city to the other was madness. It took us 2 hours in a taxi to do that journey. Normally it's about 40 minutes. So bear that in mind when you're in Istanbul, that traffic is crazy. I should have mentioned that I also got a text message from Vera Clinic saying when I would be picked up the next day for my hair transplant. Now they did mention in the text message, for me it would be 1:40 p.m. So it would be I knew automatically then that I'd probably be one of the last people to get a hair transplant that day. Usually from other people, speaking to them and watching other videos, you know, so a lot of people picked up at 6 to 7 a.m. because they have the early start. I didn't mind this because it meant that I could have a good lie-in and relax before the operation. So the next day at 1:40 p.m. we were quite promptly picked up by the Vera Clinic van. The journey from the hotel to Vera Clinic was about 15-20 minutes. The driver did pick up another patient from another hotel on the way. Once I arrived at the Vera Clinic, there were staff there to greet me. They knew my name and they were expecting me, which I thought was a nice touch to have. After a little short sit down in the reception area, I was called to see the doctor. Now the doctor will go through a medical form about your medical history, noting that if there's any concerns that they should be aware of before you carry out a hair transplant. Then he quickly moved on to the task of drawing a hairline, or the new hairline you have after hair transplant. The first thing he did was put 2 dots on my forehead to place out. 1 where he recommends your hairline should be, and 2 is the lowest part you could bring your hair forward to. Now for me, while he was doing this, I mentioned that actually even that I thought both were too low for what I wanted. I wanted to keep my hairline as it was and not bring it forward, just because that would mean 1, it does look more natural, and 2, it saves me using grafts on bringing my head forward rather than actually populating density in my head. The doctor was happy with this, although he did say at that point, because I was keeping my hairline quite high compared to what he recommended, that maybe the temples would be something I should think about doing another time and not during the first hair transplant that take place. Now in hindsight, I probably should have challenged him on that and said, actually I do insist on doing my temporal and side regions, just because then the front of my head would have been done all at one time. I was then taken back upstairs to pay for the hair transplant itself. Now I did pay in cash in pound sterling, but you can also pay in euros, dollars, as well. One thing to bear in mind is if you do decide to pay by a card payment, they do charge you a 8% commission. I think that's from the banks rather than the surgery, but I don't know here. So just that's something to bear in mind if you do go for a hair transplant. One thing I wanted to mention was that where I was drawing up my hairline and what I was going to do with my hair, I decided to only have a hair transplant on the front of my head and the mid-scalp and not the crown, just because I wanted to get the correct density in those first two places first. And also I didn't want to over harvest my donier area and have an issue where that looks worse than it was before. And then also it allowed me the opportunity to come back for a second hair transplant. I was then taken back downstairs where I was asked to change into a gown. They also took me to have my hair shaved off. Now at this point, after you have your hair shaved off, your blood pressure is taken and they extract some blood from you. I think this blood is used for some of the PRP treatment, but I'm not exactly sure what happened with that. And also given a blood pressure tablet and some Xanax to calm you down. Now, this is the point where I was a bit more worried, because when they took my blood pressure, I had a reading of over 200 over 138, I think, which is very high at that point. I wasn't aware of this. I do remember them asking me if I was feeling okay. My reply to them at that point was, the car must have been in a long time. I'm perfectly fine and waiting for my hair transplant. I think at this point there has a bit of concern for them due to the high blood pressure. Some of the doctors did come in to have a look, and you know, I didn't know what was happening because I was speaking in Turkish. But after their conversation, they gave me an additional blood pressure tablet, which I took and waited for around 20 minutes, and they redid my blood pressure reading, which came back to a normal level, at which point they were more happy to go ahead with the hair transplant. So I think by the time I made it into the operating theatre, it was about 3:30 p.m, which is a very quick turnaround given that I was picked up only at 1:40. As you go in, you are told to lie flat on your stomach with your head down on the operating bed, and they very quickly start with their anesthetic. Now, it is called needleless anesthetic, but please bear in mind needles are involved. First thing they use is a tool that looks like a pen, where they go around the perimeter of where the extraction is going to be taking place, and it fires shots into your head. Once that is done, they do follow up with the long needles for the anesthetic. Now, I have to say that this is the most painful part of the process. The pen shots are probably a 7, 8 in pain, but they're very sharp and very quick. Now, once that's done, the most painful part is where they put the actual anesthetic needles into your head. That is close to a 9, almost, yeah, unbearable pain. However, it does last for only about roughly 2 minutes, 2-3 minutes as they numb the whole area. At that point, you kind of have a very warm, numb sensation in your head, and they very quickly move on to then doing the extraction phase of the operation. Now, the extraction, you can noticeably hear it. It's like a drill tool and you can feel it, but no pain in your head. It's very quick the way they're doing it, and they seem to know what they're doing in terms of the technicians who carry it out. Although the process does last quite a while, it's almost 2 hours, yet you're lying flat on your stomach while they extract hairs from your head. It can be uncomfortable, but you just have to grin and bear it at this point. Now, once that was done, they do give you a sandwich and a drink and take a little 5-10 minute break to go to the bathroom, whatever, before going on to the next point of your hair transplant. At this point, the doctor does come in and examine the hairline and what's been drawn on your head. This is the quickest part of the hair transplant. Effectively, what happens here is a doctor will come in and use the blade, which is the sapphire tip blade that they mention as the sapphire hair transplant, and they start putting cuts in your head for where the hairs are going to place later. I think it was just under an hour to do all the incisions in my head. You do definitely feel it, but no pain at that point. But you can feel every incision go in. It's a weird sensation. I can't really picture it to you here, but I'm sure if you have a hair transplant, you will know. Once that is done, you quickly move on to the insertions of the hairs that they have previously extracted. Now, this is the longest part of the hair transplant. I think for me, it took almost 3 hours at this point. I'm not sure how many technicians or doctors were in the room at this time. They do kind of cover your eyes. However, I'm pretty sure at least there was 2 people in the room doing the insertions of the hair. I know this because they're having a long conversation while they were doing the hair transplant, but they didn't seem like at any point they were distracted or anything, so they were all quite professional while they were doing it. Finally, when they finished the insertions, it was almost about 10:30 p.m. at this point, so you can imagine I was on the operating table for about 6 hours. It's quite a long process, and at this point, as I got off the table and they took me to another room, I could clearly see that everyone else had gone home, bar the staff that were doing my hair transplant at that point. At this point, they do give you a bit of a medical bag which has your neck pillow in it and a bit of covering for your pillow at this point. They also give you a number of medications to take. One is your 7 days of antibiotics. Another one is 2 or 3 days of anti-swelling pills, and also some painkillers. You do take a painkiller while you're there, just because they want you to kind of take that before you leave, and then you're on your way back to the hotel. Now, they also show you how to sleep. They did say at this point that you could lie flat on your back rather than at 45 degrees, but ideally at 45 degrees if you can. As I had got back to the hotel so late, I did order some room service just because I was feeling pretty hungry after that operation, and quite quickly decided to go have some rest and try and sleep. Now, the first night's sleep is probably the worst one you're going to get. There's very little you can do in terms of comfort. You just have to grin and bear it. You do have the bandage. I could feel at that point it was filling with pus and fluid. It was quite weird. Luckily though, I didn't have much fluid leakage onto my pillow or the covering that I put on top of the pillow, thankfully. I remember that I slept about 11:30, but by 2 a.m. I was wide awake in pain as the painkillers wear off. You could feel all the tension and the pus and the pain from the strain of having the hair transplant. Now, at this point, I knew I couldn't take more painkillers because I had to wait a certain period. So the next 2 to 3 hours, I was probably lying awake in bed. By about 4 or 5 a.m., I was okay to have more painkillers. And then finally, I got an hour or 2 of sleep before waking up for 7 a.m. So the next morning at 7:40 a.m., I was picked up again by the same van and taken back to the clinic, and at this point is where they remove the bandages and give you your first wash of your hair. Now, this is one of the best feelings I had after the op, is where they take the bandages off and you feel the air hitting your head and a nice comfort cool sensation of the water in your head. They do take the opportunity at this point to examine your head and the hairs that have been transplanted. This is where if there are 1 or 2 hairs that haven't quite bedded in correctly overnight, they have an opportunity here to kind of prod them back in and check that everything's seated properly. There was 1 or 2 in my head that they did check before they kind of said that okay. It's here that they give you a shampoo and moisturizer to use on your head for the daily washes every morning for the next 10 to 12 days before your scabs fall out. After that, they do move on to kind of sales pitch mode. They give you a list of things that they recommend that you're required to buy at this point. So one includes topical finasteride, some vitamins, GF serum, GF shampoo, etc. Now, I should point out these things are really expensive at the point of sale, and you can probably find them a lot cheaper in your local country. So for example, for myself, I decided not to buy any of them apart from the GF shampoo, which cost me £250 for a 6-month supply, which I think is really expensive. I probably shouldn't have bought it, but I thought as I was there, let me buy this. Subsequently, I've also purchased a subscription in the UK for topical finasteride and topical minoxidil. They came a lot cheaper in the UK than they are when they try and sell them to you. Once that was done, I was taken to a different location for my first session of the Oxycure hyperbaric chamber. Now, this is where when I arrived, there was about 11 other people who had had their hair transplant at Vera the next day. Is where I fully comprehended how many people they get through on a daily basis. So then we were all funneled into a Oxycure hyperbaric chamber. You were giving oxygen masks where they reduced the pressure, air pressure in the chamber to below, I can't remember, 20-30 meters below sea level, and you were given pure oxygen at that point to kind of promote blood circulation into your head, I think. Now, I didn't think this session was particularly useful. I wasn't even sure if the mask was working properly. It lasted 45 minutes, I think, in the actual chamber, as only about 20-30 minutes of the session. After that, we were taken back to our hotel to rest before the afternoon, evening session of the Oxycure chamber again. Now, I remember for my second Oxycure session, the van actually was running late and they were meant to be making about 4:30. But by the time we got to 5 PM, I messaged and saying, what's going on here? They informed me that the van was running late. So at that point, I was like, look, I didn't find it useful the first session. What is the point for me to go to the second session? So I told them not to bother and that I would actually skip the session completely. So after this day, effectively, according to the clinic, you are free to go home if you want to, although you do have a stay at the hotel for that night. Now for me, I chose to stay an additional 4 days in Istanbul just to relax and thinking I could explore the city, and if I had any issues, I'm still in the city and I could quite quickly go to Vera. So for the next 3 or 4 days in Istanbul, I continued with the process of medication, but also every morning I was doing the daily washes of my head. Now this involves putting the moisturizer on your head for about 15-20 minutes, letting it sit in before you gently wash it off with some lukewarm water in the shower. Now you don't want a very hard spray on your head, you want a very soft water to go into your head so it doesn't unsettle any of the hairs that have been transplanted. Although I decided to stay in Istanbul for an extra few days, the problem was I was always tired from the lack of sleep. The medication wasn't really sitting well with me, and also the constant itching and burning sensation on your head start to distract you and kind of ruin the time I had in the city. I ended up spending a lot more time in the hotel just resting. Now I'll put up some pictures of what my head looked like and the recovery during this first period, the 4 or 5 days that I was in Istanbul, and then the few days leading up to where you remove your scabs. Now by about day 9 is where the scabs on the transplant area for me started to very soften a lot, and initially just by touching it they were starting to fall off at that point, which is great for me because this is literally 1 day before you are required to actually go have a wash where you effectively encourage the scabs to fall off on that day and make sure your head is clean of scabs by the end of day 10. This is to allow your embedded hairs that have been transplanted to settle at this point, but also have some breathing. They're allowed to breathe and not be skewed by scabs on your head. Fast forward about to week 3, and this is where you start seeing a big change in your head where the implanted hairs actually start falling out. This is the start of the shedding phase effectively. Now, initially I wasn't quite worried because I expected this to happen, but over the next 2 or 3 weeks, pretty much all of it will fall out at this point, and you're back to a point where you're thinking, oh no, did the hair transplant work? So currently I'm at week 6 post hair transplant. This is where I've gone through the first phase, and my reflection over the first phase is the amount of itchiness on your head and the constant having the feeling that you want to scratch it. And sleeping, I think for the first month, I think for me was the hardest, just because it's very raw and tender at the back of your head. You feel it when you put on a pillow, and I found it very hard to toss and turn and go to sleep. When I say the itching though, it isn't on the transplanted area, it's very much on the donor area. Even now, 6 weeks on, I have still some elements of it. It's not as bad as it was for, say, from up to week 4, but it is still there. One thing I like to add though is on my transplanted area here, I still have some numbness on this area where I don't really feel any pain, even when I try and put my finger in deeply, where I don't feel much pain. Now, I did check this with Vera over the text messages on WhatsApp that you can do, and they instructed me that this should kind of subside by a month too. So I'm hoping in the next few weeks it does go away. So how does my head look like 6 weeks on from a hair transplant? So here, I'm just gonna give you a quick view of what my head looks like at this point in time. So this is a view of the top of my head. As you can see, that it is quite patchy, and you can see that hair has fallen out, and that's all the transplanted hair is kind of slowly gone. I did have hair before the hair transplant, so what was there before you can kind of see prominently more dense than what's already started to fall out. On the sides, you can see it's kind of recovered a lot more, the donor hair. There is still patchiness, but this is slowly going away. If I can try and twist over, there you can see the back. You can see that it's come through. There are still elements where it's a bit thinner in the middle where they're taking the most hair, and at the back here it's kind of subsided. So that's the progress I've had. At this point, I don't feel like, you know, my head looks as well it should do, but hopefully given another month or 2, my hair should start growing back, and I'll be in the process to give you an update. One of the things I want to share with you was my thoughts on the Vera Clinic and how I felt about going there. Would I choose them again? So a very good positive for me was that everyone was very professional and polite along the whole journey. You have communication both from the pre-operation, where they are kind of giving you dates and times of things, as well as any questions you might have, they'll have to answer. And also they're quite prompt in messaging about where you should be the next day and what time you expect to be picked up. All the staff I came across seemed very experienced and competent in what they do. Now, when you have your operation, it's very much like clockwork as people come in and out for the various processes that are taken. You don't even notice that people are coming out most of the time. I never had any concern over the staff and what they were doing with my head. I was comfortable in their presence. I would say though, if you're someone that's still quite unsure, unfamiliar with the process when you do go for a hair transplant, you do not have time on the day to kind of comprehend certain things that are happening, just because everything happens very fast. For example, for me, I was picked up at 1:40 p.m. and by, I think it was about 2 o'clock when I got to the clinic, and by 3:30 I was already on the operating table. Given that that's the time you have to draw your hairline, pay for it, shave your head, blood pressure, check your medication, etc. And you're on the table. So during that time, there's not much opportunity to ask questions or anything that may go on. Another thing that I would mention is that when it comes to post-hair care, say taking finasteride, minoxidil, etc., it is very generic. It isn't catered to the individual, which I would personally think is important. However, I was comfortable with this because I knew what to expect. So if you're looking for someone where you may get the more personalized conversations when it comes to post-hair transplant care and products to take, perhaps Vera isn't the right clinic for you. You're better off going to a clinic where the doctor takes you through the whole step. Although for me, I would say I was perfectly fine with this because I understood what I want to take post-hair transplant, and I didn't want to take finasteride as a oral medication or minoxidil. The final thing to add is that the doctors aren't involved in the whole process. Now, there is a doctor who, for me, took my medical history and drew the hairline that I wanted. He then wasn't a part of the actual operation procedure. Another doctor came about to actually do the incisions, so it wasn't cohesion between the doctors, but I was comfortable that the doctors were involved at the stages. The rest of it is by technicians. There's a number of technicians that come in and out. Some purely do the extraction phase, others do the graft counting, others would help with the actual incisions, but also the insertions of the hair at the end of the hair transplant. Hopefully that gives you a fair and honest feeling for me of using Vera Hair Clinic. Now, I would say that I do recommend them, but I'd only recommend them for people who know what they were doing or what to expect and have done their research before they go for a hair transplant. On the day, there isn't much time for you to kind of sit down and ask questions. There is opportunity to ask questions, but you don't get time between processes to really comprehend what's going on. I want to give full transparency in terms of what this process cost me. Now, I will go through the cost one by one, but also I will do this in British pounds, so I will put up any conversions to euros and dollars on the screen too. So the first thing was flights. For me, on Pegasus Airlines, it's quite cheap to go to Turkey from the UK, and it cost me £150. This actually for me included additional baggage. Now I wanted to have checked in baggage, having kind of looked at other people's experiences who at the airport sometimes get challenged on the medication and the products they bought, which they have to throw away because they can't carry it in their hand luggage. For me, it was quite helpful because I had bought, you know, a number of shampoos and I didn't want to lose them, having spent so much money on them. The hair transplant itself cost me £3,160. Now I did pay a bit more for the fast recovery because I took my friend with me who stayed in the hotel just as some moral support. This added an extra 25 euros per night, so the 3 nights were 75 euros I think for me. But I was happy with this, the price wasn't an issue, and it was a good hotel. I then had another 4-night stay in Istanbul. This cost me another £250. Now, you don't have to do this, you can obviously go home. I felt this is useful just to kind of have that bedding in time in Istanbul for anything that went wrong, just in case. I was quite confident nothing would. However, it also meant that I have some downtime before I went back to the UK. The next thing was me buying the GF shampoos. I haven't actually used any of these so far. I've been quite happy using my own products, but I will start slowly using them now. They did cost me £250 for 6 months supply. It's up to you and your discretion if you choose to buy these or not. Some people actually choose to just buy the GF serum, or the vitamins or finasteride. It's up to you what you want to do here. So the total cost for me, including all the things I mentioned, was £3,810 for my journey for a hair transplant. Now this doesn't include any money spent on food subsequently, but that didn't come up to more than maybe £200–300 for my holiday stay there. So finally, I wanted to end with discussing what's next for me on my hair transplant journey. So at this point now, 6 weeks post hair transplant, I could finally start using products to increase the longevity of my hair from falling out. One thing I've started to do on a daily basis is use rosemary oil. I put a little bit on my hair before I go to sleep, maybe an hour or two before I go to sleep, just let it kind of settle in. I've also subscribed to get some topical finasteride and minoxidil spray that I can use every day in the morning. So that should arrive in the following week, and I will subsequently start that to do that as a daily process. Another thing that I will be starting is using a dermal roller. However, that I can't start that till after 3 months after post-op. Hopefully you've enjoyed this video and found it quite informative. If you do have any questions, please put them down on the comment section. What I will try and do is maybe do a 6 months update. I don't want to do a very incremental one. Maybe in 6 months time, I'll do an update of what my hair's looking like. At that point, I would have a fair amount of time to recover, and my hair should have started to kind of grow. Also, what help has finasteride and minoxidil done for me in the process. Thank you for watching, and I hope you check in soon.